The Brown Mountain Lights. Brown Mountain is a low ridge in Burke County that during dry, crisp evenings in the autumn is host to a genuine and baffling mystery. When conditions are right, mysterious glowing orbs can be seen to rise up off the mountain, hover and wobble about 15 feet up in the air, and then disappear. There's no denying that the lights are real. They have been observed by countless witnesses and photographed on many occasions, but what they are is still unknown. The Brown Mountain Lights have been observed for centuries, and multiple legends have arisen around the phenomenon. The Cherokee were aware of the lights, and according to some accounts, claimed that the lights were the souls of Cherokee women searching for their men who had died in a great battle between the Cherokee and the Catawba that took place on Brown Mountain. Another legend says that the lights are the ghostly echoes of lights that appeared during a search for a murdered woman in the 19th century. But what was once the most widely known legend was recorded in song in the 1950s by the duo known as the Sweethearts of Country Music. Scott Wiseman and Myrtle Eleanor Cooper were both North Carolina natives, who recorded as Lulubelle and Scotty from the 1920s until the 1950s. A married couple, the two performed together from 1935 until 1958 as regulars on the Chicago radio station's WLS-AM's National Barn Dance program. At the time, they were one of the biggest acts in country music. The song Brown Mountain Light, penned by Wiseman, tells a version of the story where a man, accompanied by a slave, becomes lost while hunting on the mountain. The man is never found. The slave returns to the mountain every night with a lantern to hunt for him, carrying on this search even from beyond the grave. Wiseman, who was from nearby Boone, said this version of the story is one he heard from his uncle, who took him hunting and camping near Brown Mountain. The song rose to the top of the country charts and subsequently became the best-known version of the legend for a generation. The legend of Brown Mountain, recorded in the Lulubelle and Scotty song, is somewhat dated, particularly in regard to its unforgivable romanticizing of slavery. Indeed, it's easy to imagine a retelling of this story where the lights are from people looking for the slave, who, when realizing he was alone on the mountain, seized his chance and hightailed it for Ohio and freedom. As for the lights themselves, many different possible scientific explanations have been offered, from swamp gas to the reflections of automobile headlights from the valley below. But every explanation offered up so far seems to be too easily disproved. The lights have been observed since before automobiles existed, so headlights are an unsatisfactory explanation, and the lights were even observed during the 1916 flood that shut down all automobile and railway traffic in the valley below. The swamp gas theory seems to be slightly hobbled by the complete absence of a swamp on Brown Mountain. Some have theorized that the lights may be a naturally occurring electrical discharge caused by the slow movement of the geological fault line below the mountain. Whatever their cause, people still flock to see the Brown Mountain Lights, but spotting them is never guaranteed. Reportedly, your best chance to see the lights comes on a dry, clear night in October or November, after all the leaves are off the trees. The Gray Man of Hatteras. Hurricanes are a fact of life on the Carolina coast. Every few years, one of these tremendous storms is going to blow in from the Atlantic and flood the coast, doing tremendous damage. These storms always move on, but while the hurricane is blowing, it's certain that homes will be lost and terribly likely that people will die. No point in the state is more vulnerable to hurricanes than Cape Hatteras. Hatteras Island sits right on the edge of the Gulf Stream, the massive current of warm water that circles through the Atlantic. This current is powerful enough to have shaped the island itself into the distinctive point that Cape Hatteras sits at the edge of. The Gulf Stream is also a path that hurricanes coming in from the Atlantic often follow, drawing their energy from the warm waters flowing beneath them. With the Gulf Stream pointed right at Cape Hatteras, there's a good chance that any hurricane blowing in will hit the island. But there's something on Hatteras that let the islanders know when a storm is coming. The Gray Man of Hatteras is an indistinct, shadowy figure who walks the beaches of Cape Hatteras as a hurricane is approaching. He appears as the first winds of the storm touch the island whenever a hurricane is a threat to the island and its inhabitants. He never speaks, or at least no one has ever heard him speak. No one has ever gotten close enough. If anyone approaches the Gray Man, his form slowly fades into the salty air, completely vanishing before the curious onlooker can reach where he was standing. But his presence alone is enough to warn the islanders. If he's seen on a beach, it's a sure way to know that the oncoming storm will be a bad one. He's a warning that nature is still something to be taken seriously. Who is the Gray Man? Some people say that he's the ghost of a sailor from the island who died at sea in a hurricane. They say that he comes back to warn his fellow islanders of the danger, because his soul was so terrorized by his windy, watery end that he can't bear to go on from this world while he can still prevent others from sharing his fate. Some others will tell you that he never was a man, that he's just a force of nature, that he's not so much a ghost as a spirit, an expression of the force pushing the wind and waves towards the vulnerable island. Even in today's world, where we can watch the storms form from space and fly airplanes into the storm to measure the winds, we still give each hurricane a name when it's born. We may name them because some part of us still thinks that anything so powerful and so willful must be alive. Maybe the Gray Man is just the hurricane itself talking to us, the voice of that living force born out of the deep ocean. Whoever he was, whatever he is, the Gray Man of Hatteras still walks the beaches under the shadow of the tallest lighthouse whenever a hurricane is heading towards the island. Even as Cape Hatteras has gone from being a lonely little island to a crowded tourist beach, the Gray Man still warns us of the coming storm. So if you're ever on Hatteras and you turn on the TV and they're talking about a storm, stroll down to the cloud-covered beach and look out towards the waves as the first few drops of rain begin to fall. Look for a shadowy figure prowling the beach where the high waves hit the sand. And if you see him, pack up and get off the island as quick as you can. This storm is going to be a big one. Crybaby Lane. Crybaby Lane is a creepy little stretch of deserted grass off Western Boulevard in Raleigh, with a sad, scary story tied to it. The story begins in the middle of the last century, when what's now called Crybaby Lane was the site of a Roman Catholic orphanage. The orphanage was the home to a few dozen young boys and girls, who were raised by the priests, as had been happening there since the orphanage had been founded in the early 1900s. We can assume these orphans lived as orphans did in those days, going to school to learn a useful trade, and once a week during the summers, being taken down to swim in the pool at nearby Pullen Park. Since this was a Catholic home, some of the older boys would be studying for the priesthood. For those children without parents, there weren't many options back then. It may not have been a completely happy life, but it was more than it could have been. This all came to a tragic end one night in 1958, when a fire broke out in the orphanage dormitory. The fire spread quickly through the building, and by the time the sleeping children were aware of the smoke and the heat filling the hallways of their only home, it was too late. When the fire department arrived, the building had already been gutted, reduced to burnt beams and flame-broken bricks. Many of the children burned to death in the flames. Months after the fire, when after what remained of the burned orphanage had been torn down and hauled away, the city began receiving complaints from the neighbors that the smell of smoke was still strong in the air, as if the fire was still burning. The smell was so strong that some people would choke when they walked into the field, as if their own lungs were filling up with smoke. This happened even though the new grass had already covered up where the building once stood. But the smell of smoke was only part of it. There were also the voices. The voices came out of the air, quietly at first, then growing louder. They were the voices of children. Children crying, wailing in fear, sadness, and pain. The screams of the orphaned children who had died in the fire could still be heard. Now, some of the neighbors thought it was just their minds playing tricks on them. They had been there the night of the fire, and seen and heard these horrible things. They thought that they just couldn't get the awful memories out of their heads. But time passed, and the people who had been there that night all died or moved away. But still the acrid smell of smoke lingered, and the cries of the children could still be heard. If you go to find this place yourself, you'll see that most of the houses around the field where the orphanage once stood have been abandoned. The place where the orphanage stood is now an empty field. If you hunt through the grass, you'll be able to find the cornerstone, all that's left of the old orphanage. And after you've stood in the field for a few minutes, you'll start to notice that the place has a strange, distinct smell. It's the odor of smoke and burning wood. And if you stay a few minutes more, you'll begin to hear something strange in the air. Awful, unearthly sounds. The cries of children in pain and in fear. Children who are lost, but still never able to leave the only place on earth that they ever knew as a home. And not many people will stay much longer than that in the empty field that's come to be called Crybaby Lane. Hello, my lovelies. Thank you for watching yet another video on the Abysmal channel. I've loved having you here, and I've enjoyed reading some local legends from North Carolina. I chose North Carolina to cover first with legends because I live in North Carolina, always have, and hopefully always will. I love North Carolina. But anyway, I am planning on making this a series and covering local legends from a lot of other states, maybe eventually every state in the US. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you guys again soon. Thank you. Bye.